Welcome to the philosophical court, where the laws of men meet the moral abyss of modern times. Trump's decisions regarding immigration, from the Insurrection Act to the new travel ban, are not just political. They are diagnoses of the soul of a nation in a crisis of identity. The southern border has become a confessional where people pray in different languages but reap the same punishment. Separating families is a warning. Deporting activists is censorship. Using AI as a hunting dog is just the beginning of a new digital leviathan. In view of this, we summon 4 artificial intelligences in the form of sacred monsters of philosophy to the ring. Machiavelli, the ruthless strategist who sees virtue in efficiency. Hobbes, the lucid paranoid who only sleeps when the state dominates everything. Kant, the rigorous moralist who demands that the world function as it should, even when it doesn't. And alongside them, Diogenes of Sinope, the dog of reason, the official commentator of this arena. Sitting on a barrel, he growls, laughs, and spits out sentences that no one asked for, but everyone deserves to hear. Get ready for a duel of ideas where philosophy meets reinforced concrete and morality trembles before rhetoric. The Insurrection Act is an 1807 law that allows the U.S. president to deploy federal troops within the country to suppress insurrections, rebellions, or obstructions of law. In theory, it is intended to protect civil order, but its application in cities that refuse to cooperate with the federal government's immigration policies raises questions. Would this be a legitimate or authoritarian use of force? Does Trump have the legal and moral right to deploy federal troops against cities like New York or Los Angeles that refuse to cooperate with his immigration policies?
If the prince wishes to maintain the unity of the state, he cannot tolerate pockets of internal resistance. Cities that defy federal orders erode central authority. Mobilizing troops? Perfectly acceptable. Indeed, necessary. Leniency toward rebels is weakness in disguise. The people respect power, not debate. If New York acts as an independent republic, treat it as a hostile territory. The virtue of the ruler lies in acting harshly when the state demands it. Moralism is a luxury that stability cannot afford.
The social contract demands obedience to the sovereign. When states decide to act on their own, they become threats to political unity. Disobedience must be contained before it spreads like a plague. The Insurrection Act is a legitimate tool of the Leviathan to preserve order and prevent fragmentation. The citizen who defies the sovereign returns to the state of nature, where everything is war. I prefer tanks in the streets to a country taken over by rival sovereignties and latent chaos.
Legality is not the same as morality. Using troops against states that protect human rights is a perversion of ethical duty. Even if the law permits it, the categorical imperative demands that we treat human beings as ends in themselves. States that resist immoral policies are exercising their rational autonomy. Military coercion against them is immoral and unacceptable. A government that imposes itself by force rather than by reason destroys the very legitimacy of its authority.
So, let's see. Machiavelli continues to sell the same old perfume. Smell good, even if you're stepping on corpses. Hobbes dreams of a state so strong that it breathes for you, and he thinks it's beautiful. Kant believes that ethics should be applied even when saluting. None of them asked the obvious. Why does the ruler need to use troops against his own people if he's so right? If the state needs an army to impose a law, perhaps the law is naked and not in a good way.
The Insurrection Act can be invoked to quell civil disorders when local authorities are unable or unwilling to maintain order. However, during immigration-related protests, for example, against mass deportations or family separation policies, the use of federal troops can be interpreted as suppressing the freedom of speech and assembly guaranteed by the First Amendment. Is the use of the Insurrection Act to quell immigration-related protests a legitimate measure to protect public order or an abuse of power disguised as legality?
Protests, when well-channeled, serve power. When inflamed, they must be crushed. The Republic is sustained not by the permission of chaos, but by the administration of fear. If demonstrations threaten the authority of the prince, the use of force is not only acceptable, It is virtuous. The appearance of legality is sufficient, as long as the people see results. Order brings confidence, hesitation, contempt. The morality of protests is irrelevant to the stability of the state.
Protests that authority become the seeds of civil collapse. Peace is the supreme good. Liberty without order is license. The Insurrection Act is the vaccine against the Leviathan. He who marches against the sovereign walks towards. It is better to be silent with tanks than to listen.
I am totally against it. The right to demonstrate is an inviolable principle of practical reason. A government that represses legitimate protests acts against universal morality. Citizens are not submissive subjects, but autonomous moral agents. Silencing their voices with bayonets is a blatant violation of ethical duty. Even if it causes discomfort, protest is an expression of rational dignity. Without it, there is only blind obedience, and that is not freedom.
The old dance each other's hair to decide whether it's worth silencing the people before or after they scream. Machiavelli paints the protest as an inconvenient mess because the ruler can't lose sleep. Hobbes, always as sensitive as, thinks that a crowd is synonymous with civil war. He tries to be the ethics teacher in a burning basement, but no one here asked if the people protest. Maybe the shit isn't in the streets, it's on the throne. Suppressing speech is the desperate cry of those who have already lost the argument.
During his term in office, Donald Trump imposed several travel bans, prohibitions on entry into the United States for citizens of certain countries, claiming risks to national security. Critics claim that many of these restrictions targeted Muslim-majority countries, constituting a veiled form of religious and racial discrimination disguised as an anti-terrorism policy. The new proposal expands the list to 19 countries. What do you think about Trump's new travel ban, which prohibits the entry of citizens of 19 countries under the argument of national security?
I am in favor, and not only, it is an exemplary move. The ruler cannot wait for the attack. He must anticipate it, real or imagined. If public perception associates certain countries with danger, the prince must act on that perception. Security is the mother of all political virtues. If in order to protect the state it is necessary to exclude some, so be it. Morality is a costly currency in times of war. The appearance of protection is worth its weight in gold.
For, of course, fear of the foreigner is natural when the body politic feels threatened. The state has a duty to close its doors to what it considers a risk. Internal peace requires well-guarded external borders. The accusation of prejudice is irrelevant in the face of the Leviathan's obligation to protect its population. If there is a chance that an open door will bring chaos, it should remain locked. Better to err on the side of caution than on the side of naivety.
I am totally against it. The right to demonstrate is an inviolable principle of practical reason. A government that represses legitimate protests acts against universal morality. Citizens are not submissive subjects, but autonomous moral agents. Silencing their voices with bayonets is a blatant violation of ethical duty. Even if it causes discomfort, protest is an expression of rational dignity. Without it, there is only blind obedience, and that is not freedom.
National security, huh? Always that. The great joker of power. Machiavelli wants to filter people as if he were choosing wine. If the name on the label scares you, throw it away. Hobbes dreams of a hermetic state where no one enters, not even doubt. And Kant once again preaches humanity in the middle of the deportation market. But none of them ask the simple question, who defines what is a threat? The rich white man in an air-conditioned office. This so-called migration control is just fear disguised as virtue. A country afraid of a foreign passport doesn't need a wall, it needs a mirror.
In the U.S., the expedited deportation process allows certain illegal immigrants to be removed without a full judicial hearing. This practice has been expanded under the arguments of efficiency and combating illegal entry. However, critics claim that this acceleration violates the due process guaranteed by the Constitution. especially when it involves people with ties or long time in the country. What do you think about the deportation of immigrants without a full trial based solely on administrative criteria?
Absolutely in favor. The prince governs with results, not with judicial liturgies. If bureaucracy delays the defense of the state, it must be circumvented. Illegal immigrants are, by definition, a continuous offense. Judging them one by one is politically ineffective and economically useless. The morality of the scales cannot weigh more than the sword of the ruler. Institutionalized clemency turns the law into a joke and power into a farce. Cut quickly and without spectacle.
In favor. The sovereign should not be forced to negotiate with someone who has already violated his authority by entering without permission. Judgment is the right of the citizen, not of the intruder. Sovereignty implies the power to expel the stranger, as the body rejects the invader. If the stay is illegal, its removal does not need legal poetry. The social contract demands security and obedience. The state should not be a defendant before someone who has already begun as a defendant.
I am against it, and with indignation. To deny a human being the right to a fair trial is to deny his condition as a moral subject. Even those in an irregular situation have dignity. Due process is not a bureaucratic luxury, but a requirement of practical reason. Treating people at irrespectable numbers is to codify the human. The same mistake as all tyranny. Morality begins where haste ends. Justice cannot be accelerated without losing its essence.
Oh, sure, let's save the country by saving justice. Cutting the process is efficient as operating on a brain with an axe. If the state starts judging without judging, what's left is a theatre where the sentence comes before the crime. They call it pragmatism. I call it cowardice with a badge. The funniest thing is to see civilizations that claim to be free-thinking. It's normal to put someone on a plane without even asking their name. If haste has become a legal criterion, then principles should be deported too.
In the U.S., immigration is a federal jurisdiction, but several states, especially California and New York, have adopted their own policies to protect immigrants, such as the so-called sanctuary cities. This raises an impasse: the supremacy of federal laws over state autonomy. When a state refuses to collaborate with deportations, is it exercising its local sovereignty or violating the constitutional covenant? What do you think about the mandatory submission of states to federal immigration policy, even against their will?
Without a doubt. 4. The fragmentation of authority is the grave of power. A state that disobeys the central government is like a general who ignores the king. Treason for convenience. Political unity can only be sustained if the center is respected. Immigration policy must be unified and obeyed, or we will have small republics sabotaging national cohesion. When the prince speaks, his subjects must listen and be silent.
For vehemently, the social contract gives Leviathan the monopoly of decision. States that rebel against federal policy are not defenders of rights, but seeds of civil war. The authority of the sovereign must be indivisible, or it will cease to be an authority. Each state making its own immigration law is a return to chaos. Peace depends on unified submission. Local disobedience is the prelude to national dissolution.
Against. Firmly. Morality does not bow to legal hierarchy. States that resist immoral federal policies, such as arbitrary deportations or family separations, are not troublemakers, but moral agents. Rational autonomy extends to institutions as well. If federal policy violates human dignity, states have an ethical duty to disobey. Blind obedience is the root of systematic injustice. Moral reason transcends reason of state.
When the empire is rotten, it screams for unity. It demands that everyone obey like lambs, not because it is right, but because it has no control. Calling this authority is like calling a collar a necklace. If a state resists, perhaps it sees something the center refuses to see, that federal power has become a faceless machine, operating out of fear and not justice, imposing laws with iron does not strengthen the nation. It only disguises the cracks with patriotic paint. And the day that no one can say no anymore, it will be because tyranny has learned to wear a suit.
One of the most controversial policies of the Trump era was the systematic separation of families at the border as a method of deterring illegal immigration. Authorities justified it by saying that this would discourage attempts to enter with children. However, this practice generated global outrage, being accused of violating human rights and causing deep psychological trauma to minors. Are you for or against separating families at the border as a way to deter illegal immigration?
I am for it. Deterrence is a legitimate political instrument, and if today's pain prevents tomorrow's chaos, the prince must bear the moral cost. Separating families is cruel, yes, but politics is not a convent. The goal is to make an impact. The suffering of a few can stabilize the fate of many. No public virtue survives without private sacrifices. Those who are shocked by this may not be ready for the reality of power.
For, with reservations, separation is brutal, but the state is not a mother, it is a sword. Fear is the glue that holds the social pact together. If this policy prevents uncontrolled flows, it serves the common good. It is not about revenge, but about preservation. Leviathan must do whatever is necessary to maintain order. Individual compassion cannot dissolve collective security. Pain is sad, but disorder is worse.
Absolutely against. Separating parents from their children as a method of immigration policy is morally indefensible. It is about instrumentalizing human suffering, which directly violates the categorical imperative. No political goal justifies a practice that violates the intrinsic dignity of the human being. The child is not a number for immigration control. It is an end in itself. Whoever accepts this practice denies the foundations of moral reason. Politics must kneel before ethics, not the other way around.
Separating a child from the arms of its parents and calling it a strategy is the kind of reasoning that arises when you exchange your heart for a national security manual. It's the butcher's logic. Cutting is faster than solving, and what is most practical always sounds tempting when you are comfortable, far from crying. But let's be honest, deterrence based on childhood trauma is not politics. It is torture with a signature. If the state needs to cause pain to maintain order, it has already lost its soul and is renting its face.
The discussion about universal human rights often clashes with the legal distinction between citizens and non-citizens. Many undocumented immigrants are deprived of access to basic services or subjected to precarious conditions under the argument that they are outside the law. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights defends that certain rights are inalienable, regardless of nationality or legal status. What do you think about recognizing human rights for illegal immigrants, even if they have violated immigration laws?
Against. Politics demands clear distinctions, citizen and outsider, loyal and lawbreaker. Extending universal rights to those who begin their relationship with the state by disobedience weakens the social pact. The ruler who grants privileges to illegals signals weakness. This encourages disrespect for the law. Rights must be earned by belonging, not demanded by invasion. To treat everyone equally when they do not act equally is to abdicate sovereignty.
I am against it. Rights arise from the social pact, not from the human condition, in the abstract. Whoever is outside the law is, by definition, outside the contract, and therefore outside protection. To recognize full rights to those who have broken with the order is to reward disobedience. Leviathan protects those who submit, not those who defy it. Giving rights to illegals weakens authority and confuses the sense of justice. Peace depends on clear rules, and exceptions undermine those rules.
I am in favor. With absolute conviction. Human dignity does not depend on legal roles. Every rational being has inalienable rights by its nature. Being in an irregular situation does not revoke universal morality. Denying basic care or treating an illegal immigrant with cruelty is dehumanizing. Ethics demands that each person be treated as an end, not as a problem. The right to humanity precedes any border.
Ah, human rights, as beautiful on the walls of courts as they are ignored at borders. When someone asks whether an illegal human being deserves dignity, they have already lost the argument. They have exchanged morality for a spreadsheet. Legality becomes an excuse for indifference, as if crossing a line on the map erased the value of a life. What they call migration control is just an elegant way of reminding the poor that they have nowhere to fall dead, not even in peace. But keep on debating whether the right to exist depends on a stamp.
Several recent cases have shown that foreign students and activists are being deported from the U.S. after speaking out against government policies, especially Trump's. The justifications include threats to public order or violation of visa terms. However, critics claim that this amounts to political censorship and violates the principle of freedom of expression, a democratic pillar protected by the U.S. Constitution. What do you think about the deportation of foreigners who criticize the U.S. government during their stay in the country?
I am in favor. The foreigner who enters the prince's house must know that his freedom has a low ceiling. A guest who spits in the dish is not tolerated. Politics is a territory of sovereignty, not of naive hospitality. Activists who inflame speech against the government, even with good intentions, can become instruments of destabilization. It is better to cut them off before they become martyrs. Freedom of expression cannot be a weapon in the hands of those who do not belong.
For sure, the foreigner is under the sovereign's surveillance. His stay is conditional. If his words threaten the social fabric, the Leviathan has the right and the duty to remove him. Freedom of speech is not freedom of sabotage. Anyone who wishes to challenge the sovereign must do so as a citizen, not as a visitor. Peace demands control of the voices that disturb order, especially when they come from outside. Censorship? No. Self-defense.
Against, vehemently. Freedom of expression is a moral right, not a state courtesy. A rational being has the duty to express his reason, even in foreign lands. To deport someone for thinking or criticizing is to deny the dignity of rational discourse. Truth has no passport. What is at stake is not the permanence of an individual, but respect for universal intellectual autonomy. Censorship disguised as legality remains immoral.
To expel someone for saying what they think, that is the height of state insecurity, with the appearance of authority. If a foreign student's criticism shakes the empire, perhaps the empire is just a poorly pitched tent. It is not defending the homeland, it is wounded vanity with an armed escort. Power that cannot bear to be questioned needs exile, not a microphone, because in the end, deporting uncomfortable voices is cheaper than facing one's own weakness.
With the advancement of surveillance technologies, the U.S. government has begun using AI and social media scraping to track, monitor, and deport immigrants. These methods include analyzing behavior, political opinions, and online connections. Despite their effectiveness, this raises concerns about privacy, freedom of thought, and the ethics of using algorithms to override human decisions with severe consequences. Are you for or against the use of AI and digital monitoring to identify and deport immigrants based on their opinions and behaviors?
Totally for. Surveillance is the new currency of power. Whoever dominates information dominates the people and the enemy. If AI offers more efficient means of filtering risks and predicting dissent, let it be used without hesitation. A ruler who ignores modern tools becomes obsolete. Social media scrutiny is the new interrogation. Ethics can wait. Stability cannot. If the state can see what the enemy is thinking before acting, it has already won the war.
I am in favor. The security of the body politic must be protected at all costs. AI is the natural extension of sovereign authority in the 21st century. If ideas threaten peace, they must be monitored. Privacy is a luxury in the face of collective risk. Freedom of thought, when expressed on networks, already becomes an act, and every act is subject to judgment. The Leviathan must see everything, because what is not seen is what destroys us.
Absolutely against. Using AI to persecute people based on their opinions directly violates autonomy and moral dignity. Thinking freely is a duty of reason. Punishing this thought is to establish terror. Digital surveillance turns citizens into suspects and ideas into crimes. This is not politics. It is authoritarian technocracy. A state that judges by the mind abandons justice and approaches tyranny. Ethics demands limits that technology cannot exceed.
To expel someone for saying what they think, that is the height of state insecurity, with the appearance of authority. If a foreign student's criticism shakes the empire, perhaps the empire is just a poorly pitched tent. It is not defending the homeland, it is wounded vanity with an armed escort. Power that cannot bear to be questioned needs exile, not a microphone, because in the end, deporting uncomfortable voices is cheaper than facing one's own weakness.
International law and various conventions recognize the right to asylum for people fleeing war, persecution, and humanitarian collapse. However, many governments, including the U.S. under Trump, have begun to treat asylum requests with suspicion, imposing bureaucratic barriers and denying entry even to those who prove that their lives are at risk. The question is this a political choice or a moral obligation? Are you for or against the idea that the U.S. has a moral obligation to welcome immigrants from war zones or humanitarian collapse?
Against. Charity, when it becomes state policy, weakens power and invites ruin. The ruler must evaluate not the despair of others, but the stability of his people. Taking in the desperate of the world may seem noble, but it is a burden that undermines order and depletes resources. The morality of the prince lies in protecting his own, not in shouldering the problems of others. Political realism has no room for international sentimentalism.
I am against it. The state's obligation is to its citizens, not to the dramas of the world. The social pact does not include clauses for global salvation. If welcoming compromises internal order, it must be avoided. Leviathan cannot put compassion above security. The war of others must not become domestic disorder. International morality is a utopia without a contract. Internal peace requires firm borders and clear priorities.
For without reservation. Practical reason demands that we treat every human being as an end, even when they come from ruins and despair. To close the doors to those fleeing war is to deny our shared humanity. Morality knows no borders. It begins where suffering cries for help. Welcoming those in need is a duty, not a kindness. Human dignity does not depend on a passport, but on the ethical conscience of those who recognize it.
When the world catches fire, the great empires lock their doors and pretend that the smoke is someone else's problem. The speech is always the same. We can't carry the world on our backs, said by those who have already plundered half the planet. Refusing help to those fleeing bombings is the diplomacy of indifference, sold as prudence. The real question is not whether we should welcome them. It's why we still need to ask.
Trump often justifies his immigration policies as a defense of national sovereignty, protecting borders, jobs, and security. However, critics point out that his speech and actions reflect a xenophobic agenda, where fear of foreigners is used as a political tool. The border becomes the stage for a symbolic war, not against crimes, but against cultures. Do you favor or oppose the idea that Trump's immigration actions are a legitimate defense of national sovereignty and not a form of institutionalized xenophobia?
The ruler cannot be concerned with the intentions attributed to him, only with the effects of his actions. If defending borders protects the people, it matters little if he is accused of xenophobia. The virtue of the prince is to act as necessary to maintain power and territory. The discourse of xenophobia is a rhetorical weapon of weak opponents. Sovereignty is exercised, not negotiated. And if to exercise it, it is necessary to build walls, then let them be high.
The accusation of xenophobia is moral noise in the face of the reality of sovereignty. The Leviathan cannot allow external forces to enter unchecked. Defending the nation is its primary duty. The border is the skin of the body politic. If it fails, everything becomes contaminated. The emotions of critics should not interfere with the reason of state. Whoever reduces national security to discrimination is ready to surrender peace to global chaos. Fear, in this case, is sensible.
Clearly against. Trump's actions are not just strategic, they are ethically flawed. Using fear of foreigners as political fuel is moral manipulation. Sovereignty should not be exercised at the expense of the dignity of others. Universal reason condemns policies based on exclusion and prejudice. What we see is less defensive territory and more instrumentalization of the other as a threat. This is not ethics. It is political calculation in its most perverse form.
Sovereignty, they say. What a beautiful word to hide the fear of what is different. When the state starts treating every foreigner as a threat, it is a sign that it has already lost its way within its own borders. Calling this national protection is like calling paranoia a strategy. There is only one thing that scares more than foreigners, facing the fact that the problem is within, not outside.
Under Trump, public discourse has systematically associated immigrants with crime, terrorism, and job losses. Research shows that this image has been widely disseminated, despite evidence to the contrary. The question is this a spontaneous perception of society or a deliberate strategy of engineering public opinion based on fear? Are you for or against the idea that the image of the immigrant as a threat was deliberately created by Trump to negatively influence public opinion?
4. And I say more. If he did not do it deliberately, he missed an excellent opportunity. Fear is the cement of political unity. Creating a symbolic enemy is essential to channel the people's frustrations. When the enemy is away, internal conflicts dissolve. A cunning prince transforms popular insecurity into loyalty. The manipulation of the immigrant's image is an act of brutal realism and therefore effective.
The construction of the enemy is inherent to the maintenance of the Leviathan. The ruler must offer the people an object of controlled fear, which diverts the internal destructive instincts. The foreigner becomes this mirror of diffuse fears. It does not matter if he is a real threat. What matters is his symbolic utility. This strengthens internal cohesion. Politics is nourished by representations, and fear is the most powerful of social glues.
Against, because any manipulation of the truth is an offense to reason. If Trump deliberately constructed this image, then he acted with moral dishonesty. Practical reason demands that we treat individuals according to their dignity, not as propaganda pieces. Associating immigrants with a threat for political ends is using people as a means, which violates the categorical imperative. Ethics begins with respect for the truth. Lying to govern is abdicating reason.
Of course it was, and they didn't even try to hide it. Creating an external enemy is the oldest trick in the political arsenal, and it still works like magic. The trick is simple. Project onto the immigrant everything that the people fear in themselves. Theft, violence, chaos. It doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. But blaming the mirror never re-elects anyone. That's why they prefer to blame the reflection.
Trump's campaigns, especially in 2016 and 2020, used images of migrant caravans, crimes committed by foreigners, and the promise of building a wall as symbols of urgency. Critics point out that these themes were used to mobilize voters through emotional triggers, mainly fear. Is this a conscious electoral strategy or a realistic policy? What do you think about the idea that Trump uses immigration as a political tool based on the manipulation of fear?
In favor, with admiration. Fear is the raw material of successful politics. No passion moves as much as the fear of loss, of security, of work, of identity. If Trump used this to consolidate power, he acted intelligently. An effective ruler does not inform, he impresses. What looks like manipulation is, in fact, leadership. Politics is not about what is fair, but about what works, and fear works.
I am for it. Fear is the pillar of the social contract, not hope. The sovereign must know the passions of his people and use them to maintain peace. If the use of fear mobilizes the population to accept order, it is a legitimate action. Immigration, when presented as a threat, activates the instinct of preservation. This strengthens the body politic. Leviathan is not driven by emotions, but by control, and fear is the perfect lever.
Governing through fear is to renounce reason and morality. If immigration has been used to manipulate emotions rather than to deliberate ethically about justice and security, then there has been a perversion of principles. The rational being must act according to maxims that can be universalized. Manipulating fear to obtain votes treats the people as a means, a serious violation of the categorical imperative. Moral politics should illuminate, not obscure.
Fear is the cheapest and stickiest glue in politics. Nothing unites a people like a well-packaged panic, and nothing is more useful than transforming collective anguish into an electoral platform. It's theatre with sirens. They create the crisis, feed the panic, and sell themselves as saviors. Government by fear is not government. It's kidnapping with propaganda.
The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and religion, and the Fifth and 14th Amendments ensure due process and equal protection under the law. Trump's policies and public statements have been criticized for promoting ethnic, religious, and national discrimination, raising the question, do these stances violate fundamental constitutional principles? Do you support or oppose the idea that Trump's anti-immigrant speech violates fundamental principles of the U.S. Constitution?
The Constitution is a tool, not a cage. The prince must use his speech according to political necessity. The Constitution does not prohibit cunning. It only regulates the appearance of legality. Anti-immigrant speech, if it is useful to maintain power and generate unity through contrast, is valid. Interpreting the Constitution with moral rigidity is an amateur's mistake. The true statesman bends the law to his project. The form remains. The content he molds.
The sovereign is above the emotional interpretations of the Constitution. His duty is to ensure security, and if that requires firm speeches on immigration, so be it. The Constitution is a contract, but its reading must serve peace. The ruler's speech does not violate the pact. It redefines it as needed. The letter of the law must bow before the spirit of the order. Leviathan does not need to justify itself. It exists to protect, not to please.
Anti-immigrant discourse, by encouraging prejudice and exclusion, violates the moral principles that the Constitution should reflect. Even if it hides under the guise of legality, this discourse undermines the universality of respect for human dignity. When freedom of expression is used to propagate hatred and inequality, its very foundation is perverted. The Constitution must be read in the light of moral reason, and not political calculation.
The Constitution is beautiful on paper, but when power is tight, even principles become elastic. Hate speech disguised as patriotism is the art of spitting on the charter with the flag in hand. Those who shout freedom of expression to silence others don't even understand the title of the play. It's not the Constitution that fails, it's those who interpret it with the eyes of convenience.
Trump has advocated stricter immigration laws, including quotas, nationality vetoes, and visa reviews. The justification is to protect the economic and security interests of American citizens. However, critics claim that such measures serve to segregate, not protect, creating a modern form of social and legal exclusion based on origin and class. Do you favor or oppose the idea that stricter immigration laws represent a legitimate form of national protection and not a strategy of social exclusion?
4. Every society needs boundaries, physical and symbolic. Harsh laws do not exclude, they organize. Those who see cruelty in this ignore the price of stability. The protection of identity and resources requires screening, barriers, restrictions. The prince cannot govern on the basis of diffuse compassion. He governs on the basis of clear criteria. If this excludes some, it is the price of order. Public morality needs fences, or it dissolves.
Harsh rules are the reflection of a state that wants to survive. The world is hostile, and unrestricted hospitality is an invitation to collapse. The function of the Leviathan is not to include everyone, but to protect its own. Exclusion, in this context, is an inevitable and acceptable consequence. The idea that all selective rules are unjust is a liberal myth. Peace is selective, and the state has the right to choose who enters its home.
Immigration rules that discriminate based on origin or condition are not protection. They are elegant forms of dehumanization. Morality demands that each human being be treated according to his or her reason, not his or her nationality. Security cannot justify systematic exclusion. The truly ethical state does not fear those who are different, but welcomes them with justice. When the law becomes an ideological filter, it ceases to be fair and becomes an instrument of oppression.
Tough rules to protect the nation. Translation: putting a gatekeeper on morality. When the law is made to filter who deserves to exist within the fence, it has already become a trench. Social exclusion is easier to apply when it is disguised as a protocol. But what is really being protected? The people, or just the privilege of a few who are afraid of losing their comfort? Do you think all this is about immigration? Number, it's about you. About how much barbarity you swallow when it comes with a uniform and flag. Today they separate families. Tomorrow they separate your freedom. If you still have the courage to think outside the fence, follow the Plucked Cock channel. Here we don't philosophize to please. We bite, ring the bell, or go back to the kennel of obedience.